I went to boarding school. My mother taught me preschool, and then we went on our first furlough. So you go for 4 years, and you go back to the United States for a year, for various reasons. One, for a break, and two, to go talk to the churches that sent you money, give them a report, ask for more money, go to churches that didn't give you money and ask them to give you money, and etc. Um, so my mother homeschooled me preschool, and then we had our first furlough, and I went to kindergarten at Cuna Elementary School. At least I think it was Cuna Elementary School. It was an elementary school, and we were living in Meridian near Cuna, uh, and then we went back, and my parents sent me to boarding school. First grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And then we went back on our second furlough, and I attended fifth grade at Cole Christian School in Boise, Idaho. Also living in Meridian, but I think someone must have sponsored us to go to this private school, because I know my parents couldn't have afforded it. I'm guessing the church must have paid for it. And so fifth grade at Cole Christian School in Boise, Idaho, and then back to Africa, Senegal, West Africa. And while we were gone, there was an uprising in the Casamance, and the fighting and the mined roads and etc. just wasn't conducive to learning. So they had sent all the kids back to the villages, and they had even sent all of the missionaries. All of the teachers, all the teacher missionaries, out to the villages. So now, instead of learning, instead of having like a sixth grade teacher, now all the kids in the village had the one teacher. And in my case, it was the Siddals. And so if I recall correctly, I wish I could remember their names. I can see their faces. I think her name was Barb. She taught the younger kids, and the gentleman, Mr. Siddall, he taught the older kids. I was in sixth grade, of course, and so I had sixth grade with him, and he taught me how to play chess. He's the guy that taught me how to play chess. We would play all the time. And my dad is actually better. So when he and my dad would play, my dad would win, hands down. And I did get to the point where he and I could play full board. Originally, when he was teaching me, he would take his queen away, and we would play until I could win. And then he would put his queen back, and he'd take a rook away, and we'd play until I could win. And eventually, we were playing full board, and we were about equal. And that was great, So then we went back to Fonda, the mission school, for half of seventh grade. And then at that point, my parents resigned, and we moved back to the United States. And we never went back to Senegal. So went back to Middleton, Idaho, was where we lived for half of seventh grade and all of eighth grade for me. And then, and that's a story that I'm going to leave for another time. I may tell that story a little bit later. At the end of 8th grade, we moved to Caldwell and bought the house that my dad still lives in. And I went to high school at Caldwell High School. And when I started 9th grade, I distinctly remember, I remember the day. My mom was driving, I was in the car, and we were actually headed over to the house. First or second time, I can't remember if we'd already seen the house or not, or if we were going for the first time. But it kind of hit me that, you know what, I'm going to be starting 9th grade. What am I doing with my life? What am I going to do with my life? And I decided, you know, I want to be a missionary, but I don't feel like I can be a missionary like my parents were. Maybe if I'm a doctor, maybe if I be a doctor, and that's another story. I'll tell you about Andrew Sartorius as well. Maybe if I was a doctor, that would be a thing. I could give my life to that. And so I said, okay, God, I'm not that smart. But you created it. You created this world. You created science. You created everything that is. You can teach it to me. And that was it. That was my prayer going into 9th grade. And he did. He did teach it to me. I took all of the hardest classes that I could. And I did very well. A's and B's. Mostly A's, but a few B's here and there. And I graduated with a 3.9 GPA. I graduated 13th in a class of, I think it was 265. I was in the top 5%. That part I remember. But I remember going into 9th grade, that was what I said to God. I said I can't do this, but you created it and you can teach it to me. I got the nickname Bible Boy. And I got that nickname because, and people didn't really say it to my face, which I appreciate. But I got that nickname because I had a little red New Testament, and I read it cover to cover in 9th and 10th grade. During the couple minutes that I had during passing period, I'd go straight to my class and I would sit there and I would read. If I had extra time, after my homework was done in class, I would read. During lunch, I would, if it was a warm day, I'd go out on the lawn by the lunchroom and read. I read the entire New Testament through twice in high school, once in 9th and 10th grade, and then once in 11th and 12th grade. I didn't read the entire Old Testament through until I was probably, I think I finally finished it when I was 20 years old. I got hung up in a few places, the pretty normal places where most people get hung up. I no longer get hung up in those places. I've now read the entire Bible straight through. I've lost count. I think it's somewhere around 10 times. And there is a barrier. There is a point that you get to where you kind of break through, and suddenly you start seeing the connections, and those places that used to be hang-ups start becoming your favorite places. For instance, the prophets. I think the prophets are probably the least read part of the Bible, and the prophets are by far my favorite because they are wild. They are a wild ride, especially Ezekiel. My goodness. I think Ezekiel's my favorite prophet. Genuinely. Although, Elijah gives Ezekiel a run for his money because Elijah challenged God to his face, and that was pretty cool. That's another story. We'll get to that. Maybe in a couple years. Who knows? I don't know. However long it takes me to get through this. So I graduated high school, and abbreviating my story, I joined the Army. I actually joined the Army before I turned 18. And it was really because I knew there was no way I was going to be able to afford college. There was no way I was going to become a doctor. It just wasn't going to happen. And so I had this idea in my head that I was going to go to the Army's medical school. I was going to somehow I was going to get a bachelor's degree, and I was going to go to the Army's medical school and become a doctor. That's what I wanted to do. That never happened, for various reasons. But when I did join the Army, I enlisted straight out of high school. Excuse me. Got into preventive medicine as I was graduating from the preventive medicine school. I don't know, maybe someday I'll tell you the story about basic training. Went through basic training, went to San Antonio, went through the preventive medicine school, which I actually loved because it was all about public health. And I'm a scientist through and through. I'm a scientist. And it was bugs and snakes and, because bugs spread diseases, right? And so we had to do a bug collection as part of our school. So I was graduating from that, and I had orders to go to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I didn't want to go to Fort Riley, Kansas. So I didn't want to go. Of course I didn't have a choice, right? But the Army offered me the chance to stay in San Antonio and take an additional course on radiation. Learn how to be a radiation technician, health physics technician, essentially. Radiation protection, radiation safety technician. And I said, okay, because, they said if you stay for this extra course, we'll cancel your orders to Fort Riley. I said, this sounds like a great deal. I loved San Antonio. I wanted to stay there longer. So I was there an additional 12 weeks. And then I graduated and got orders to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which is clearly so much better than Fort Riley, Kansas. So I ended up in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Bounced around the Army. Fort Sill, Oklahoma to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, to Fort Lewis, Washington, from Fort Lewis, Washington to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And at that point, I finally was able to finish a bachelor's degree. It took me 8.5 years to get that bachelor's degree done, but I got it done. And I applied for a commission. So I ended my enlisted service, and I commissioned as an officer. Congress granted me a commission as a officer in the United States Army. So I took my sergeant stripes off, and I put on that lieutenant bar. And then I went to San Antonio for all the officer training, which was basically kind of the same thing. And honestly, it's funny because we were paired up with roommates, and my roommate was an optometrist. And I remember him sitting on the edge of his bed going, what did I do? And it was everything inside of me to not laugh out loud. And I thought to myself, I'm like, buddy, you're not enlisted. You're an officer. Like, you're going to go drinking on the weekends. You don't even have to get a haircut if you don't want to. Like, a haircut is a suggestion. When I was in basic training, they marched us down there every week to get our haircut, whether we wanted it or not. And we had to pay for it, whether we wanted it or not. Like, come on, man. Like, and I didn't say any of that to him, but, this is what was going through my head. I'm thinking, you have no idea. You've got it good, man. Like, this is the good life. You're an officer now. You're like, anyway. So, and what's more, because he's an optometrist, he's a captain. I was a lieutenant because I had a bachelor's degree. Dentists and doctors and optometrists and veterinarians, they get commissioned as captains, like direct to captain, like 03 right off the bat. I was an 01. I was a butter bar lieutenant. And I'm just thinking to myself, man, you have no idea. You have absolutely no clue because you've never been on the other side of the fence. I spent 9 years on the other side of that fence. I knew exactly how good I had it. And I loved every minute of it. So I graduated from my officer training and went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, Eisenhower Army Medical Center. Did my lieutenant years there. I already had a lot of years of experience from being a radiation safety technician. So there wasn't much that I had to learn. Mostly I just had to warm the chair for a year so I could get that piece of paper signed and be able to be a radiation safety officer. And so that's what I did. Excuse me. After that, went to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. And I was the radiation safety officer for William Beaumont Army Medical Center. The broad scope license. And I loved every bit of that 3 years. It was an absolutely fantastic assignment. Went rock climbing every other weekend. And I loved my job. I learned so much there in my job. I got so much experience under my belt. I absolutely loved it. And then the Army decided I needed a master's degree in health physics. So I went home to Idaho, to Idaho Falls, and I got my master's in health physics from Idaho State. Now, prior to that, I had done a master's in environmental science from the University of Idaho. Yes, I did that on my own. The Army didn't pay for that. The Army did pay for my master's in health physics from Idaho State. And of course, I got to be home in Idaho for 2 years, and got to see my parents pretty regularly at that point. My kids, my boys,